Okay, good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with a couple of housekeeping items first. So my name is Hannah Griffiths. I am the Citizen Science and Education Coordinator for Missouri Stream Team and Missouri Master Naturalist programs. And I'm going to start us off with a quick poll, if this works. It's only 2 questions. Tonight we're going to have a really good presentation. And we do have everybody's microphones and cameras turned off just because we have a lot of people here and we don't want too many distractions going on. Um, and if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to put them into the chat. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Cheyenne Stratton. Dr. Cheyenne Stratton is the aquatic invertebrate ecologist at the Missouri Department of Conservation, where she leads research and monitoring of the state's aquatic invertebrates with a strong emphasis on Missouri's diverse crayfish fauna. The aquatic invertebrate program focuses on understanding and conserving species of conservation concern, as well as monitoring and managing invasive crayfish populations across the state. Cheyenne received her PhD in Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences from the University of Florida in 2025, where her research examined how pathogens shape and impact outcomes of biological invasions. So with that, I'm going to let Cheyenne take over.
All right, are you seeing my screen all right? So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm really excited for this evening and I appreciate everyone tuning in. And this evening, my goal is to teach you all about the diversity and importance of Missouri's crayfishes and how you can help us. So as I stated, my goal for this training is to provide an overview of crayfish diversity, explain the ecological importance of crayfish, discuss what threats they're facing, share some of the conservation efforts we're taking in Missouri, and share how you can help us conserve the diversity of Missouri's crayfish. Before diving straight into crayfish diversity, we need to address the question, what is the difference between a crayfish, crawfish, and crawdad? Essentially, there isn't a difference, we just can't agree what to call them. There is no shortage of names for these critters ranging from crayfish, crawfish, crawdad, to mudbugs, spoondog, and ditch crickets. What you call them largely depends on where you're from. The Northeast and Upper Midwest tend to call them crayfish, while the Southeastern U.S. calls them crawfish, and us Missourians tend to call them crawdads. One rule of thumb some folks go by is crawfish are what you eat, crawdads are what you fish with, and crayfish are what you study. No matter what you call them, they all refer to the same animal, a 10-legged crustacean related to lobsters, shrimp, and crabs. Some even call them freshwater lobsters, as that is essentially what they are. That diversity of names hints at the diversity of crayfish themselves. Worldwide, there are more than 750 species of crayfish, which are found on every continent except for Antarctica and continental Africa. On the map, the darker the blue, the more crayfish species present. From that, we can see North America is the global center of diversity with more than 470 species and subspecies, most occurring east of the Rocky Mountains. Here's a closer look at crayfish diversity within North America, highlighting the fact the diversity hotspot in North America is found in the southeastern part of the U.S., indicated by the red and orange states, which includes Missouri's Ozark region. Missouri is a key stronghold for crayfish conservation in the central U.S., with over 40 native species, which includes species and subspecies representing 8 genera. This map highlights crayfish diversity by our state's watershed boundaries. Watersheds that are yellow have the highest diversity of native species, while watersheds that are darker purple have lower diversity. From this, we can see every watershed has at least one species present, and our watersheds with the greatest diversity occur in southern Missouri, specifically in the southeastern part of our state. The state's geographical and ecological diversity contributes to its crayfish diversity. Missouri is divided into 4 ecoregions: the Ozark region, Boot Heel lowlands, Prairie region, and Big River systems. Each support distinct crayfish communities with some overlap between regions. Geographically, the Ozarks has the greatest diversity with 24 taxa, which includes species and subspecies, followed by the lowlands with 14 species, and finally the Prairie region, which supports 6 species. The big rivers have 6 common species that also occur in other regions. On the previous map, we saw the watersheds that span both the Ozark and the Boot Heel region had the highest diversity, and that is because those watersheds occur in both of these unique ecoregions, which each contain a unique assemblage of crayfish species. Further supporting Missouri's importance for crayfish conservation in the U.S. is the fact Missouri has 8 crayfish species that are endemic to our state, meaning these species do not occur anywhere in the world outside of Missouri. Going clockwise, starting at the top left, this includes belted crayfish, freckled crayfish, saddle-backed crayfish, Caney Mountain cave crayfish, Big Creek crayfish, St. Francis River crayfish, woodland crayfish, and Salem cave crayfish. In addition, we have 15 species that are considered Ozark endemics, meaning a significant portion of their range occurs within our state, but also extends into neighboring Ozark states like Arkansas and Oklahoma. These are just a few examples of our Ozark endemics. Crayfish in Missouri occupy a wide variety of habitats, and essentially water equals crayfish. Based on their preferences, they can be grouped into 4 broad categories: stream dwellers, swamp, marsh, and pond dwellers, cave dwellers, and primary burrowers. These categories overlap to some extent. For example, some species inhabit seasonally flooded wetlands during winter and early spring, then retreat to burrows once the surface water dries in late spring and summer. We also see habitat partitioning, meaning species occurring in these habitats will further divide up the available habitat. For example, stream-dwelling crayfish species can be divided based on whether they prefer fast-moving riffles or slower pools and backwaters. We also see a change in habitat use based on age class, with juvenile crayfish using different habitat than adult crayfish. Most crayfish species in Missouri live in streams and rivers. They are often found under rocks, woody debris, or in shallow riffles and pools. These habitats are especially abundant in the Ozarks, where rocky stream beds and clear flowing water provide ideal habitat. Some crayfish species prefer still waters such as lakes, ponds, and wetlands where aquatic vegetation or sunken woody debris provide shelter. In lowlands and floodplains, crayfish often occupy backwaters, ditches, sloughs, and swamps. These habitats are highly variable with fluctuating water levels and frequent seasonal drying. Several Missouri species are adapted to these conditions. Missouri's karst landscapes support a unique group of cave-dwelling crayfish. These species live in underground streams, pools, and wells and are adapted to life in the darkness. Cave crayfish often have reduced pigmentation and eyesight, relying instead on tactical and chemical cues to navigate and find food. These creatures have slow growth and are generally very long-lived. There are 3 cave-adapted crayfish species in Missouri. Not all crayfish live in open water. Several Missouri species are primary burrowers, spending most of their lives underground. They dig burrows in moist soils near wetlands, prairies, or floodplains, often building distinctive mud chimneys at the burrow entrance, as pictured in the middle 2 photos. Primary burrowers only come out of their burrows to eat and mate. The burrows of these crayfish can extend to the water table up to 20 feet and can support dense crayfish populations. They can have multiple tunnels leading to a primary chamber or large room as depicted in the bottom left photo, where we have multiple entrances on the surface, including some with chimneys, and all tunnels leading to a large chamber centered at the water table. They can plug these burrows during dry and cold periods to maintain moisture within the burrow as pictured in the bottom right. To create the telltale chimney, burrowing crayfish use their claws to burrow down and roll mud into balls which they then push out of the entrance to form the chimney. Next, we're going to discuss what roles crayfish play in the environment. Crayfish are omnivorous, which essentially means they'll eat almost anything. This includes living plant material such as algae and aquatic plants, living animal flesh including insects, snails, other crayfish, and even fish, as well as dead and decaying plant and animal matter, which includes leaves, woody debris, microbes, and carcasses. Essentially, crayfish will not go hungry as they really will eat anything and everything. On the other hand, everything eats crayfish. There are over 200 documented predators of crayfish and counting, which includes aquatic, terrestrial, and avian predators. Some species are highly dependent on crayfish, with crayfish supporting a significant part of their diets. This includes popular sport fish like smallmouth bass and rock bass, and other species like hellbenders and otters rely on crayfish for up to 90% of their diets. So not only do crayfish eat everything, but everything eats crayfish. The fact that crayfish eat everything and everything eats crayfish makes them a vital part of both aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. This, along with a few other reasons, makes them a keystone species, meaning their presence in an ecosystem drives and alters the ecosystem as a whole. There are few animals capable of feeding on so many different sources, and the energy they gain from these various sources is passed up the food chain to the many predators that eat them. This diagram helps highlight how connected crayfish are within an aquatic system, with the blue arrows indicating the diversity of resources crayfish eat, and the red arrows indicating the diversity of animals that eat crayfish, which again spans to aquatic, terrestrial, and avian predators. Another reason they're considered to be a keystone species is due to their role in nutrient cycling within aquatic systems. Crayfish are the largest decomposers of dead plant material in Missouri streams. They grind up leaves and woody material into very small particles that become food for other invertebrates, which leads to nutrients being recycled through the food web. Due to their ability to alter food and nutrient availability in systems and their consumption of these resources, crayfish are capable of completely restructuring plant and invertebrate communities within an ecosystem. In addition, crayfish are considered to be ecosystem engineers, meaning they create or modify habitats that impact other organisms. Their feeding behavior of eating algae and dead materials helps to clean stream bottoms, and all crayfish, even the stream dwellers, are capable of creating at least rudimentary burrows as depicted in this diagram on the bottom, which create shelter for other organisms. The importance of crayfish as ecosystem engineers is even more significant for our primary burrowing crayfish. These crayfish create important habitat for many other species, and these burrows can be the primary shelters for many organisms, particularly in the prairie region of our state, where rocks aren't commonly available for shelter. The burrows can provide shelter year-round and provide escape from the summer heat and refuge from fire. Without crayfish burrows, some herps like snakes and amphibians would not occur in certain areas. In Missouri, the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, the northern crawfish frog, and the Graham's crayfish snake would not occur in Missouri without crayfish burrows. Crayfish burrows are also incredibly important for the state and federally endangered Heinz emerald dragonfly. The first several years of a dragonfly's life are actually spent in an aquatic larval form called a nymph, which is pictured in the bottom left inset. The nymph uses crayfish burrows as its primary habitat over winter and during drier times of the year until it morphs into its terrestrial form where it lives for only a few weeks. Crayfish burrows have other benefits for our terrestrial landscapes. Some areas are estimated to have 7 to 12 miles of crayfish tunnels per acre. The top photo shows an area with 62 burrows in view. This significant tunneling helps to aerate and moisten soil, which improves overall soil health and enhances native plant growth. So next we're going to dive into the conservation status of crayfish and what threats they're facing. Within the U.S., crayfish are considered to be the fourth most imperiled group of animals just behind mussels and snails, with 55% of crayfish species in the U.S. considered to be at risk of extinction. This graph shows the breakdown of the level of imperilment for various organisms on the left, and along the top x-axis we have the percent of animals at risk in the U.S. And so from this we can see that crayfish are falling out around number 4 as being the most imperiled, going from critically imperiled in the green color to vulnerable in the darker blue. Many of our Missouri crayfish species face imperilment. The Missouri Department of Conservation has identified 26 of our 41 crayfish species as species of conservation concern. Of these, 5 are listed as state endangered and 2 are listed as federally threatened in the Endangered Species Act, and these 2 species are pictured to the left. These are our 5 state endangered species. All 5 of these species have very small natural ranges, and all but the cave crayfish are actively being displaced by an invasive crayfish. The coldwater crayfish and spring river crayfish both have very limited ranges in Missouri and Arkansas and are being replaced by the invasive gap ring crayfish. We don't believe there are any remaining populations of the spring river crayfish in Missouri due to this invasion. The bottom 2 species are both endemic to the upper St. Francis River and are being displaced by the woodland crayfish, which has caused them to become federally listed. The only natural reason for species imperilment or cause for concern is naturally small ranges. Some of the major threats crayfish face include invasive species, disease, habitat loss, and pollution. As stated, the only natural reason for imperilment is naturally limited ranges, and more than 45% of U.S. crayfish species ranges are small enough to be contained within a single state. 56% of Missouri species only occur in Missouri and/or neighboring Ozark states. If a species doesn't have a large range to start with, small changes to their range can have very large consequences. These are a few examples within Missouri. The Big Creek crayfish on the left is only found in the St. Francis River Basin. The 11-point river crayfish in the middle is only found in the 11-point river spanning Missouri and Arkansas. And the Caney Mountain cave crayfish is only found in a single cave in southern Missouri. Invasive crayfish are one of the largest threats to native crayfish populations globally, and I want to start by differentiating an introduced species versus an invasive species. An introduced species is one that has been transported and introduced outside its natural range, and it has the potential to become invasive. An invasive species is an introduced species that has become established and is causing impacts to the ecosystem it has been introduced to. As of 2021, nearly all U.S. states were dealing with at least one invasive crayfish, as indicated by this map, where blue states and provinces did not report any invasive species. In addition, more than half the states had at least 3 invasive crayfish, species present as indicated by the states in yellow, orange, and red. And globally, invasive crayfish are estimated to cost at least $120.5 million annually through control, management, and damage. In Wisconsin alone, they're estimated to cost $3 million annually in damage and loss of angler spending. So what's the deal with invasive crayfish? Why are they a problem? When they invade a system, they tend to cause declines or removal of native crayfish species through direct aggressive interactions, competition for resources, and spreading new diseases. Unfortunately, it's estimated that 4% of North American crayfish species will go extinct per decade due to invasive crayfish. In addition, invasive crayfish can cause declines in other native species like native amphibians, reptiles, mollusks, and fish, as they disrupt the ecosystem as a whole because if we remember, crayfish are keystone species. They will directly eat fish and amphibian eggs, and they also will alter available habitat by destroying aquatic plant beds which serve as food resources and habitat for many native aquatic species. This then alters the food web as a whole. Crayfish are introduced to new areas one of 4 ways. First, they're a popular experimental animal and are shipped around the world through companies like Carolina Biological Supply for research purposes. They can then escape or be released from experimental facilities. The most common way crayfish are introduced globally is due to their popularity for human consumption. Live crayfish are raised and shipped all over the world for food such as crawfish boils. Crayfish tend to be sneaky and are quite the escape artists, so there are many cases of crayfish escaping prior to being cooked, leading to introduced populations. Another avenue that is becoming more problematic is keeping crayfish as pets, either at home or in the classroom. Classroom pets tend to get released into the local waterway at the end of the school year, and when kids grow tired of their pet crayfish at home, they are released into the local waterway regardless of where they came from. The online sale of crayfish as pets has boomed in recent years, leading to crayfish being shipped all over the world. Finally, the primary way crayfish introductions have occurred in Missouri and much of the Midwest is through bait bucket release, meaning at the end of the day, fishermen dump any leftover bait they have into whatever water body they're fishing, regardless of whether the bait was collected there. Within Missouri, we have over 40 documented introductions resulting from the introduction of 9 different crayfish species. This map shows the sub-watersheds the species have been recorded in pink and yellow. There are a few sub-watersheds in the state that have more than one introduced species, which is indicated by the yellow sub-watersheds. Missouri is unique as all 9 species that have been introduced into our state also have native populations in our state. This can be a really weird topic to wrap your head around, and I'm sure you're asking yourself, how can a species be both native and introduced to our state? I'm hoping this map helps explain it. Through historical surveys, we know that this crayfish species is native to the watersheds highlighted in orange, but through continuous long-term monitoring of our state's aquatic systems, we have found the species introduced and spreading throughout a neighboring watershed indicated by the gray dots. This particular invasive is believed to be a result of bait bucket release. Many of these introductions throughout our state have led to established invasive populations which have been found to cause declines in 6 of our native crayfish species. Most of the introductions throughout Missouri are believed to be a result of live release by anglers, pet owners, and schools. Missouri has a few regulations to help limit invasive crayfish. First, there is only a single species of crayfish, the virile or northern crayfish, that is legally allowed to be sold as live bait. This species was chosen as it occurs throughout a majority of the state naturally. If folks wish to collect their own live bait, they must have a valid fishing permit and are limited to collecting 150 individuals per day. Crayfish species of conservation concern are not to be collected for bait. And finally, it's illegal to release crayfish, including pets, bait, or moved individuals, into the wild. Next, I want to highlight our crayfish conservation efforts in Missouri. The Aquatic Invertebrate Program at the Missouri Department of Conservation was previously known as the Statewide Crayfish Program and has been running for nearly 40 years. In this time, the Crayfish Program conducted more than 30 studies focused on determining distribution, life cycles, habitat requirements, and genetics of 10 at-risk crayfish species. The program is now expanding to include other at-risk aquatic invertebrates like dragonflies, mayflies, and isopods, but we still have a significant focus on crayfish. The Aquatic Invertebrate Program does not include mussels or snails, as those fall to the state's malacologist. The goal of the Aquatic Invertebrate Program is fourfold. First, to increase knowledge of aquatic invertebrate ecology and management, to increase knowledge required to conserve imperiled species, provide public education and information, and to develop conservation strategies for aquatic invertebrates. Now I'm going to share some of what the Aquatic Invertebrate Program has been up to recently. A major focus has been on the St. Francis River crayfish and Big Creek crayfish, which are endemic to the upper St. Francis River, which the upper St. Francis River is indicated here by this map. These two crayfish have been listed as federally threatened. These species face several threats, including the fact that they're endemic to a single watershed. In addition, they're being replaced by the invasive woodland crayfish, which competes with the endemics for resources and also hybridizes with them. And finally, this watershed has a long history of mining as well as ongoing mining, which has impacted both species. The woodland crayfish is native to 3 adjacent watersheds indicated by the light gray watersheds. It was introduced to the upper St. Francis watershed indicated by the darker watershed, likely from bait bucket introduction. It was first found in Stouts Creek, noted by the triangle on the map, in 1984. MDC and partners have mapped the progression of the woodland crayfish invasion within the upper St. Francis watershed from 1998 on the left through to 2023 on the right. Each of these maps is looking at the rivers and streams of this watershed, with the black segments indicating the streams that the woodland crayfish has been found. So on the left in 1998, there were only a couple of stream segments that had woodland crayfish present. And now, as of 2023, they're found in nearly the entire western half of the watershed. They also have been found in the main stem river and will likely begin to spread into the eastern half of the watershed in time. After recent efforts to document exactly where the invader is, our next step is to begin identifying refuge areas or uninvaded areas with healthy populations of St. Francis River crayfish or Big Creek crayfish to protect long term. We are also working on trying to determine how to slow or stop the spread of the woodland crayfish, with a potential option being to maintain barriers that crayfish cannot navigate, such as dams or road crossings. We'll also continue to monitor the spread of the invader with time. Another project that has kept us busy is monitoring and managing several populations of invasive red swamp crayfish. This species is native to Missouri's boot heel, as indicated by the orange, but has been introduced to several areas around the state, including the 3 populations noted by the gray circles on the map. Red swamp crayfish can have extremely detrimental impacts when introduced into a system, so we quickly took action when we were made aware of these 3 populations last year. The first population was on the University of Missouri's campus in Columbia, found in a small ornamental koi pond. We immediately began a trapping and removal effort in the pond to reduce the population. The graph on the left shows our catch rate on the y-axis over a 8-week period. And in this time frame, we removed nearly 6,000 individuals from the pond. All of these crayfish were donated to Mizzou's Raptor Rehab, so the birds were eating very well for those 8 weeks. We followed up with a chemical treatment to kill any remaining crayfish, but haven't been completely successful. Red swamp crayfish are still present, but thankfully in very low numbers. In addition, we were made aware of 2 populations of red swamp crayfish near St. Louis. These 2 populations are 11.5 miles apart from one another, meaning they likely aren't the only populations of red swamp crayfish in the area, as there are many other water bodies nearby and in between the 2. So these were found in Forest Park and Walker Lake. Walker Lake is located near Kirkwood, Missouri. And we're currently working to determine how many other water bodies red swamp crayfish are present in the St. Louis area. So moving away from the invasive species work, another project we're working on is assessing the impact of wetland restoration and management on our primary burrowing crayfish populations. This involves sampling primary burrowing crayfish on actively managed conservation areas and on areas with restored wetlands to understand how various management practices may influence burrowing crayfish populations. The left photo is an example of a restored wetland, and the right photo is an actively managed conservation area. During this work, we are also examining how the communities associated with crayfish burrows are impacted, as well as trying to get a better idea of exactly what organisms do use crayfish burrows. In some instances, we have collected information through physically collecting animals from burrows, like the smallmouth salamander pictured on the left, but we are also answering this question using environmental DNA, or eDNA. This method allows us to take a soil sample or water sample and extract animal DNA to identify what animals have been in the burrow without having to physically sample the burrow or see the organism. Our fieldwork for this project is going to be wrapping up in the next month, and I'm very eager to see what we find. I'm going to end with one of my personal favorites, our work with the Caney Mountain Cave crayfish. This species is state endangered as it is endemic to a single cave in southern Missouri. This means this crayfish is not found anywhere else in the world outside of this single cave. This species is a cave obligate, meaning it has adapted to life in the dark, so it lacks pigmentation, has reduced eyes, and heavily relies on chemical and tactile cues to navigate its environment. Since the species only occurs in a single cave, protecting this cave and its water quality is critical to the survival of the species. Therefore, we recently began a long-term monitoring project to assess the cave's water quality to understand what the water quality should look like. This includes measuring things like temperature, dissolved oxygen, ammonium, and nitrate. The goal is to understand how the water quality changes throughout the year and to have a baseline data set to compare any water quality changes to. We get to visit the cave every 6 weeks for this project and have observed a very healthy population of crayfish on every visit, like this crayfish carrying eggs. So now that you know what we've been up to, if you're interested in assisting us with our state's crayfish conservation efforts, there's now an opportunity for you. Through the Missouri Crayfish Finders project, you can assist MDC with tracking populations of invasive crayfish and updating the known distribution of Missouri's crayfish diversity throughout the state. You can assist in this effort by submitting crayfish observations in iNaturalist. The rest of this training will cover where to look for them, how to handle them, how to take proper photos for identification, and how to submit data to the project. A recording of this training along with a brief guide will be available in the project on iNaturalist for your reference, which can be accessed through this QR code, which I will share again later. For members of the general public to participate in this project, you must hold a valid Missouri fishing permit or be exempt from a fishing permit, which includes individuals 15 years old or younger, or individuals 65 years old or older. Another exemption are Stream Team volunteers. Stream Team volunteers can participate in this project without being required to hold a fishing permit, as participation in this project can be reported as a Stream Team activity. I do want to emphasize that this is supplemental to standard Stream Team protocols, and involvement in this project should not interfere with standard protocols or collections. Stream Team volunteers are encouraged to submit observations of crayfish encountered during routine biological monitoring or additional sampling efforts targeting crayfish. Next, we're going to cover how to catch crayfish. When collecting crayfish on a Missouri fishing permit, there are several legal methods, which include hand capture, dip net, throw net, pull-in line, seine, and trapping. There are specific specifications in the Wildlife Code for use of a seine or a trap. For this project, hand capturing or using a net would be the best method for collection. You're not able to collect any crayfish species of conservation concern on a fishing permit. A complete list of these species can be found on the MDC website. Stream Team volunteers are encouraged to use dip nets or seines when available and spend 30 minutes sampling all available habitats for crayfish. At a minimum, we ask that each volunteer spends 5 minutes searching for crayfish when participating. Now that we know what to use to catch them, let's cover where we can find them. When looking in streams and rivers, you want to look in shallow riffles under large rocks, and the best method for capture is either by hand or with a seine. You can also search woody debris, root wads, and aquatic vegetation in deeper or slower areas of streams and rivers using a seine or a dip net. In ponds and lakes, I recommend focusing on the shoreline areas and checking under rocks, logs, and sticks along the shoreline using your hands or a dip net to collect. And if looking in wetlands, prairies, and roadside ditches, you're most likely to come across our primary burrowing crayfish, which can be collected by hand. These crayfish tend to be most active after a heavy rain and at night, so if you're eager to look for burrowing crayfish, I do recommend going out to an area after a heavy rain with a flashlight. So now that you know where to look and how to catch them, how can you hold them without getting pinched? You need to hold them behind their head where their claws can't reach, as pictured in this photo. Please be sure to keep crayfish moist and cool when handling and minimize their time out of water. They are capable of being out of the water for short periods. Once you have taken photos, please return the crayfish to where it was found. So next we're going to discuss how to take photo vouchers of the crayfish to submit through iNaturalist. We ask you take photos of at least one representative for each species you believe is present at the site. And a few tips is to use natural light, avoid shadows and glare on the crayfish, make sure your images are in focus. It's best to take photos from multiple angles, and if possible, use a neutral background. For example, if you had a white tray as a Stream Team volunteer, that can also be useful. So every submitted observation needs a minimum of 2 photos. This includes a dorsal or top view of the crayfish and a ventral or bottom view of the crayfish. So the first required photo is this dorsal view, which should capture the overall body shape and coloration along with a few key features that we'll discuss. And this photo should be taken directly from above and capture the full body from the claws to the tail fan. And the second required photo is the ventral or bottom view. This should capture the underside of the crayfish, including the base of the legs and the reproductive structure, which I'll point out in a moment. Again, we need to be sure we're capturing the full body from the claws to the tail fan with this photo. So these are the two minimum required photos for submissions, but there are a handful of additional photos that you can include with submission that are extremely helpful for identification. The first is close-up photos of the crayfish reproductive structures. These are located on the underside of the crayfish between the base of the legs, as pictured on this diagram here in the orange circle. So the male reproductive structures are known as male gonopods, and they're these rod-like extensions that nestle in between the base of the legs of the crayfish. And a side view of the gonopods is the most helpful if possible, but otherwise just a picture of that general area is extremely helpful. And then the female reproductive structure is known as the annulus ventralis, which is again nestled right in between the base of the walking legs as pictured inside this circle here. Other very helpful photos include close-ups of the head and mid-body, as there's two important features we look for here. The first includes the rostrum, which is this nose-like extension on the front of the head covering the eyes. The shape of this rostrum is very telling for the crayfish species. And second is a close-up photo of the mid-body where we're looking for the areola and specifically the width of the areola. And so that is on this diagram we see the two semicircles on the back, and the closeness of these two semicircles is a very telling characteristic. For example, in this photo example, the two semicircles are essentially touching, meaning the areola is closed. So those are two extremely helpful photos to include. And finally, some other additional photos that are useful are close-ups of the claws, showing the shape and the color of the claws. It's best to photograph both of the claws, as crayfish are able to regenerate claws if they're lost, and they can lose some of their defining characteristics if they're regenerated. And it's also best to include multiple angles, including the top of the claws as well as the bottom of the claws, as shown here. So now that you have all of your photos, or at least your two required photos, it's time to get them uploaded to iNaturalist. So first, you must have an iNaturalist account to participate in Missouri Crayfish Finders. And once you go on to iNaturalist, you can search for the Missouri Crayfish Finders project and join the project. When you opt to join the project, you'll be asked whether you'd like to share exact location data with project curators for any private or obscured observations, and we would appreciate if you would be willing to do so. If you haven't used iNaturalist, you do have the option to make location data public or obscure it in case you're sampling on private land that you don't want being shared with the general public. So that is an option. You can choose to share private or obscured data specifically with us, but not the general public. I will note that there is a different project known as the Crayfish of Missouri. This is not affiliated with us. We are the Missouri Crayfish Finders project. So once you've joined the project, you can begin your upload. I'm going to go through the steps of how to upload observations with screenshots from the iNaturalist webpage, but using the iNaturalist app, you can walk through a very similar process with uploading your observations there. So to start the upload, you'll find the green upload button in the top right corner, and it'll take you to a screen to select the photos you'd like to include. And after you've selected all of the photos, you will need to fill in the associated data. So there are a few mandatory fields that will need you to fill out for it to be able to be included within the project. The first, in the species name field, if you are unsure of the species or the genus, at a minimum you need to be putting Canberrid crayfishes within that field so that it will be flagged for this project. And in the date field, please include the date of collection, especially if it's different from the date of submitting the record. Within the location, accurate location data is extremely important for accurate identification of crayfish species. So if you click on this field, you're actually able to place a pin right where the crayfish was collected. And as I noted over here, you can select whether you want the location to be open to the public or if you'd like to obscure it or make it private. And if you have decided to share those coordinates with us, we will be able to see them as part of the project, even if it is blocked to the public. If you're a stream team volunteer participating in the notes section, if you could please include the number of volunteers, the time spent sampling, the methods used, and the stream team number. And again, all this information is going to be provided to you in some additional reference documents, as well as a recording of this video provided. And you can upload additional observations by clicking Add in the top left corner and selecting photos or sounds. So each crayfish you encounter at a site should be uploaded as a separate observation. And using this add function, you can upload multiple observations at once. So once you select add, you can select the new photos you're wishing to add to your upload. And you can then toggle between your various observations to be able to edit the data for each observation separately. And the multiple observations do not have to be collected from the same area or be collected on the same date to be able to upload them at the same time, which is really useful. So once you have all of your photos uploaded and all of the necessary data filled in, you can then submit your observation. And any observation uploaded to iNaturalist that fit the project requirements will automatically be included to the Missouri Crayfish Finders project. So this is a list of the project requirements which can be found on the project page. So essentially any observation submitted from Missouri after April 22nd or today of taxa listed in the family Canberridae or the Canberrid crayfishes, including any genus or species within that family, is going to be automatically updated to the project. There isn't anything you need to do on your end to include the observation in the project other than having the correct data associated with the observation. So once your observations start becoming uploaded onto iNaturalist and automatically being put into the project, the MDC Aquatic Invertebrate Program, including myself and my team, will review each observation in the project, and using the photos you all provide, coupled with the location data, we're going to do our best to identify each observation to species. There are a few species that are incredibly tricky to ID based on photos alone, but a majority of our species we should be able to identify with proper photos and location data. So you might be asking, what are we going to do with these data? We are hoping that we're going to be able to use these data to fill in any data gaps we have by combining the iNaturalist data with data from our historical crayfish database. So the map on the left here shows the number of crayfish species we have records for per sub-watershed. And over half of our sub-watersheds have no crayfish records indicated by the darkest purple. However, each of these likely actually has at least one crayfish species present. We just don't have the data for every sub-watershed. This can also be seen in this map by the sparse range of the species indicated by the orange sub-watersheds. This range is likely much more connected across this area of the state, and we hope we can fill in these gaps with the data you all are providing. In addition, we plan to track introduced populations of crayfish to be able to respond to introductions quickly, which will give us a much better chance of getting rid of an invader if we can very promptly respond to the introduction. All right, so a brief overview of what we have learned. First, we learned about how diverse crayfish are and that the U.S. is a hotspot for crayfish diversity. And Missouri has over 40 taxa, including species and subspecies, of crayfish, and essentially anywhere in Missouri with water can have crayfish, which can be divided into 4 groups based on their habitat preferences, which include stream dwellers, swamp and pond dwellers, cave dwellers, and primary burrowers. Next, we learned about the ecological importance of crayfish, including that crayfish eat everything and everything eats crayfish. This partially explains why crayfish are considered a keystone species and that they're also considered to be an ecosystem engineer. We then learned about their conservation status and the fact that 55% of crayfish in the U.S. face impairment, with 26 of our 41 species in Missouri listed as species of conservation concern. This is in part due to the fact many of our species have very limited natural ranges, but also due to the many threats they face, including invasive crayfish, disease, habitat loss, and pollution. Finally, we learned about Missouri's conservation efforts related to crayfish through the Aquatic Invertebrate Program at NDC and a few of the projects we are currently working on, and most importantly, how you can assist us through the Missouri Crayfish Finders project. So a huge thank you to all of you for joining this evening and for your interest in being a Missouri Crayfish Finder. We're hoping with your help, we'll continue to learn more about our native and invasive crayfish in the state to conserve our vast diversity of Missouri crayfish. Using this QR code here, you can access the Missouri Crayfish Finders project on iNaturalist, and that will be where you can find a brief guide overviewing the requirements of this project, and eventually there will be a recording of this video posted there as well. And I am happy to take any questions.
Okay, I'm gonna be reading off the questions for Cheyenne, but I just want to clarify because there's a lot of questions about the recording. The recording is going to be public, so anybody can watch the recording after this. It'll be on our YouTube page, and we're also going to link it on the iNaturalist page after we get it uploaded. So I'm going to, I can turn my camera on too. We have a couple, go ahead and put any questions you have in the chat. We have a couple that have been asked that I haven't answered. So I'm going to start with the older questions. So the first one was asked way back when you were showing the chart of the imperiled species of the United States. Someone asked, did that chart show none that are partially extinct that we know of?
In the U.S., there are 2 species in the U.S. of crayfish that are likely extinct, but the vast majority are on the verge of extinction.
Okay, and then another question that was asked a while ago, and I think this is in reference to the St. Francis River watershed. What are they mining in that watershed?
They're mining a lot of various minerals and heavy metals. So this is part of the old lead belt. So we have a lot of lead mines in the area, but there are also some newer mines that are mining other things like cadmium, zinc, um, some various other metals, but primarily metal mining.
Okay. And then do you know if MDC or if you have any other recommendations of field guides?
That's a great question. MDC does have a field guide that is a pretty good resource, but it is outdated. We are currently working on getting it updated, and so we do hope to have that later this year available for the general public.
I believe there's also, they have like those field guides that are online on the MDC website. Do you think that's a good resource?
That is also in the process of being updated
Okay.
and is not incredibly reliable at the moment. We've had a
So
lot
the
of
answer is in the
major,
future we'll have one.
in the future, yes, there's been a lot of major changes when it comes to crayfish taxonomy and what crayfish we even have in our state. So we're working on getting all of these resources updated and available to the public.
Mhm. Okay. Somebody's asking about what species a blue crayfish might be, and this was in Pulaski County.
So it's actually more common than you would anticipate for crayfish to have a blue color morph. The majority of crayfish species globally can actually have a blue color morph. Can you repeat what county it was?
Pulaski.
So in Pulaski County, I would assume that you're more than likely working with the prairie crayfish just because that's a more common species up in that area and is more commonly found to be blue. But without additional information, it's really hard to say because you can actually have a lot of species have a blue color morph, which is very interesting. And it's always a fun find.
Okay. And then can you upload crayfish identifications to iNaturalist without corresponding volunteer water quality monitoring data submission? And I can actually answer this one. The answer is yes. And we would actually like them separate anyway. So if you happen to be doing volunteer water quality monitoring and you find crayfish, yes, please upload them to the project. But if you want to also report hours you spent looking for crayfish specifically, that can be submitted as a separate activity report for stream team. Okay. How about self-cloning crayfish, the marble crayfish? I heard it was now in Missouri streams.
I really hope it's not in Missouri streams. I am unaware of it being in Missouri streams at the time. At this time, I really hope it's not, but we do, so there is a single species of crayfish known as the marbled crayfish that is able to self-clone, so the entire population of this species are females that self-clone themselves and reproduce hundreds of offspring at a time. They are an incredibly dangerous invader due to the fact that a single individual can establish an entire population. There have been a few cases of them being found in the US at this point. As of the last 2 or 3 years, they've finally made it into the US, unfortunately. We have had an instance of finding the marbled crayfish in a pet store in Missouri, but those were confiscated as soon as we were made aware of them, and we really hope that they did not make it into the waterways. But if you know where they might be and think they're in the state, please let us know so we can try to address that.
And upload them to our project.
And yes, upload them to the project.
Okay. Are you as concerned with white river crayfish in new areas? For example, Lois Bluffs.
Yes, so we are aware of that invasion. That has been around for a while. The White River crayfish is our most widespread invasive species throughout Missouri. It's been introduced kind of all over the state. It definitely is a concern, but they don't have near the drastic impacts once they're introduced as the red swamp crayfish does, and so we're more concerned with the red swamp crayfish spreading, but we still do want to know about populations of white river crawfish because those also do have negative impacts on systems.
Okay, will you have need of data on immature crayfish if no adults are collected at a given location?
We're still happy to take those observations. We are able to sometimes do something with those observations depending on the quality of the photos, but juvenile immature crayfish are a lot harder to identify compared to adult crayfish. So it really is a species by species call, but we're happy to take observations as just depending on the location and the general look of the crayfish, we might be able to get an identification.
Yeah, and I would say when in doubt, just upload it. And if it doesn't end up getting identified, that's okay.
Absolutely. We'd rather have more data than less.
Yeah. Are there any introduced non-native crayfish that are hard to differentiate between the native ones?
Yes, the main one that comes to mind at least is the woodland crayfish. Looks almost identical to the St. Francis River crayfish and the Big Creek crayfish. Those three are extremely hard to tell apart and do take an expert eye to distinguish. The main invaders that we're looking for through this project are pretty easy to distinguish from our native species.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about choosing survey sites? Is it best to go to multiple sections in a smaller area or diversify locations across a larger geographical area?
Both can have benefits. So if you're in say a stream segment that has a really high diversity of habitats available, so a couple of riffles, some root wads, some backwater areas, just really focusing on all of those different microhabitats within that stream segment can be really beneficial because each of those different habitats might have a different crayfish. But if you're in an area like a pond or a wetland maybe that is a more homogeneous type of habitat, then spreading out to larger areas, visiting multiple wetlands or ponds or stream segments could be beneficial. So there's kind of pros and cons to each.
Can my children assist me with locating crayfish? I would say yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we love to get the children interested in crayfish.
Kids are so good at finding crayfish.
And they're not afraid of getting pinched.
If we find any non-endemic crayfish while searching, what should we do with them? I find a lot of northern crayfish in the current river watershed.
For this project, we do recommend just putting them back where you found them, but we will be consistently monitoring, and so we can address those issues and invasions as they're being posted to iNaturalist.
Okay. Are you more interested in getting data on males or females?
Male crayfish are better to identify. So there are some crayfish species that are only able to be identified based off of the male gonopods. I didn't really get into all of that in this presentation, but if you're able to distinguish males and females and take photos specifically of the males, that would be fantastic, but we're happy to accept photos of either sex.
Um, okay. For getting good field pictures, you suggested using a white tray. Do you have any other tips?
I think really the main tips is take advantage of natural light. So move around, find the light that is highlighting the crayfish the best. Try not to be in a really shady spot. And if you have a neutral background, that's definitely best. While we do want to keep the crayfish pretty moist while you're taking photos, you can take it out of the water for short periods, as taking a photo with the crayfish, say like in a bucket of water, can obscure some of the features. So it is best to not actually have the crayfish in water while you're photographing it, but as soon as you're done, get it back in the water.
Okay. Is there any, and you've kind of talked about this already, but are there any specific species you want people to keep an eye out for?
So one of the big things we're looking for, especially in the more urban areas, is really tracking the spread of red swamp crayfish. Um, we know that there's populations around St. Louis. We have word that there also might be some populations around Kansas City and Springfield. So getting more records or observations in those areas would be really helpful. But honestly, getting records of some of our more common species will be extremely helpful. Our program has historically and really still does primarily focus on either our really rare species or invasive species, and we really lack records for our more common species. So anywhere you are in the state and your local creek, sending us records is extremely helpful to be able to fill in those gaps where we don't have anything.
Okay, and then can people from out of state participate? And specifically, this one says Arkansas within the White River watershed. And I will say, our iNaturalist project will only capture submissions that are submitted within the Missouri state boundaries. But I would encourage you to still submit your photos to iNaturalist. Just because it's not going directly to our project, you could be helping somebody else out. And then when people upload their observations to iNaturalist, do you want them to try to do an ID on it or to use the AI suggestion from iNaturalist? Or would you prefer them to just list it as um, the Canberra Day?
If you, so the AI function can be helpful sometimes. On iNaturalist, it'll at least get you usually to the genus of the crayfish. Um, and if you're pretty confident on the species, please feel free to go ahead and do that. I don't have a strong opinion either way, because we will be, regardless of what it's labeled as, we will be reviewing every single record and identifying it based on what we're finding, regardless of what it was labeled as. So that's really I'd say a personal preference per individual, whether or not you want to attempt to identify it or not.
Okay. Hypothetically, if a mother crayfish with eggs was found after a flood and then put into a small pond 20 miles north, would we want to find it and identify it to know if it was invasive or not?
That would probably be a good thing to know whether it should be in that area or not.
Okay, I catch extremely large crayfish in the White River Basin. Do you have any interest in that species?
So extremely large is probably going to be the long-pinchered crayfish, would be my best guess, but that's kind of an objective statement. So large could mean various things, but we're interested in all crayfish. So yeah, please submit any and all records you have of crayfish. We'd love to see them.
Have there been any invasive red swamp crayfish found in Springfield?
There is a single and we actually found it on iNaturalist before this project started, a single record in the Springfield area that does look to be red swamp crayfish potentially. The picture isn't super great and we haven't had a chance to make it down there yet, so it is possible.
Will you be able to see the data as it's updated? And I will say yes, iNaturalist, the project is public, so you can just go on there and look at the data whenever you want. And it also does like a little summary map too for the project if you're specifically in our project. So the data will be posted both on like the regular iNaturalist where it just appears to people, and then also in our project at the same time. So either way, you would be able to see the data. Typically, how large is a crayfish to be an adult?
It's pretty variable by species. I'd say the majority of crayfish in our state, after they're about an inch to an inch and a half long, they'd be considered an adult. They're usually considered an adult within their first year. We do have some species in the state that are dwarf crayfish or other really small crayfish species that only ever get to an inch or two in length, so those can mature at a smaller size. But the vast majority, I'd say, would be about an inch, inch and a half.
Okay, we made it to my favorite question. Why are crayfish so cool?
Oh, I can't answer that. It would take me another few hours to answer that question. I mean, they're cool for so many reasons. They're so diverse, and just the fact of how connected they are to our aquatic and terrestrial systems, and you don't realize how far-reaching a crayfish's impacts really are, and just all of their cool color patterns and yeah. There's too many reasons.
Okay. A bit of a more technical question. If both forms of the males are present, do you want images of both or just form one?
If you're looking at the same species and both forms are present, you can just submit photos of the form 1 male. So for those that don't know, crayfish, they switch between a reproductively active form 1 and a reproductively inactive form 2, and they have different characteristics during these two forms that they're consistently switching in and out of throughout their life. And form 1 males are better for identification purposes typically, but we can usually get what we need from Form 2 males as well.
Okay, how painful is it to get pinched?
Ooh, it depends on the crayfish. Sometimes it's really not that bad. Sometimes they can't really even give you a full pinch, but then you find one with really big claws, especially one that just molted because they have a fresh set of claws that are so sharp and they can draw blood on occasion. I'm not gonna lie, but usually it's not horrible.
Um, does Northern Missouri need more data? And if yes, what would be some recommended areas to find crayfish at?
Yes, we historically have not done a lot of work up in northern Missouri, so records in northern Missouri would be fantastic. Really, any conservation areas would be good places to start, or if you have access to streams or wetlands, those are great places to look for crayfish as well.
The only crayfish I have seen in the small spring on my farm are only about an inch long. Are these most likely juveniles or are they adults?
Did it say where that was located?
Um, I don't think so. If you want to follow up in the chat, we can circle back to that question. Whoever submitted that one. Okay, I think this one was kind of a joke one, but I want you to answer it for real. Are we allowed to eat the samples?
Technically, yes, as long as they're not a species of conservation concern, you can collect and eat crayfish. Only if you collect, you can't collect more than 150 a day though.
And make sure you submit all 150 to our project before you eat them.
Yes, correct.
Um, how do we treat crayfish collected from the mainstream of the Mississippi River? Is this in state? And I will say it'll depend on how iNaturalist categorizes whatever your coordinates are for that data point. So it's not really us making the decision whether it's in state or not. It would be iNaturalist. And Cheyenne can always go in and look at the other observations that are kind of on the edges as well. Just because it's being narrowed down by our project doesn't mean that it's not useful data to submit to iNaturalist. Roughly how many species of crayfish are there in Missouri?
Right now we know of 41 species in the state, but we're probably going to be adding a couple in the next few years. We just keep learning more and keep finding more crayfish.
Are those new ones being identified visually or through DNA processes?
A little bit of both. So there are some species that, or so for example, right now we have one species that is split into two subspecies, and at this point we have enough data to elevate both of them to individual species levels. And then one of the main ones, or the main groups, is our burrowing crayfish. We just historically throughout the US haven't had a great understanding of burrowing crayfish, and as people are actually starting to work with burrowing crayfish more, we're realizing there's a much greater diversity of species than previously appreciated. So that's one that's added a lot of species records to our state.
So because we just talked about that, somebody just asked, is it possible to find a new species of crayfish?
It is definitely possible. There's definitely some out there. It does take a lot of time and expertise from various folks to be able to confirm whether a species is a new one. You have to look at not only what the crayfish looks like and its various features, but also look at its DNA as well.
And then a follow-up to that question about the small crayfish from that spring. It's in Douglas County, north of Bryant Creek.
Douglas County, north of Bryant Creek. I'm trying to think of where either of those things are because I'm blanking right now. I know Bryant Creek. If Bryant Creek north of Lake Norfolk. South Central. Okay, yeah, South Central Missouri. So that is probably juvenile crayfish that you're seeing. Um, so our really small dwarf crayfish, we have those in the far southeastern corner of the state, and then we have another crayfish, the Neosho midget crayfish, that's in the far southwestern corner of the state. So those I don't believe would be overlapping with what you're seeing in Douglas County. So likely you're probably just seeing more juvenile crayfish, and you probably have some bigger ones around.
Okay, what's the coolest crayfish you've ever seen?
Oh, the Caney Mountain Cave crayfish. It's my favorite crayfish. It's found only in a single cave in Missouri in the entire world. It's the rarest crayfish in North America, and it's just incredible to be able to see such a special unique crayfish that so few people have had the opportunity to actually observe. That's an easy one.
Is there a best time of year to ID sexually formed males?
Yes, so crayfish will be in Form 1 usually from either late July or early August through around March, and then during the summer warmer months is when they'll switch to their Form 2, their reproductively inactive form, because crayfish are going to be mating in the fall, and then they'll stay in their reproductively active form over winter and then molt back into their reproductively inactive form in the spring.
Okay, does the Arkansas-Missouri border need more data?
Everywhere in the state, honestly, could use a little more data. Um, there are definitely some areas along the border that could use some more data. I'd say especially the Elk and White River drainages, and then anywhere in the Boot Heel would be great places to get more data.
Okay, and just a heads up to everybody, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm trying to get through these questions as much as possible, which I think we can do it depending on how many more keep coming in. But just an update on the time. Is it legal or recommended to use a crawdad trap to collect samples in a lake?
It is legal to collect lake sample or to collect crayfish using a trap, and it's not restricted to just lakes. So that's definitely a possibility. There are specific requirements listed in the wildlife code, which I believe had in this presentation, because I do not remember the specifications off the top of my head about the size of the trap that you're allowed to use on a fishing permit. So definitely look into that before using a trap.
And does the 150 limit on the crayfish, does that count for invasive crayfish?
Yes, it includes any crayfish. And it's not 150 per species, it's 150 total.
What is the lifespan and how many molts must a mature adult endure on average?
The lifespan varies by species. The majority of our crayfish in the state live 3 to 4 years. Our burrowing crayfish are longer lived. We don't know exactly how long, but we're thinking upwards of 8 years. And our cave crayfish have even longer lifespans. So as juveniles, crayfish will undergo up to over 10 molts in their first year. And then after that, crayfish typically molt twice a year for the rest of their life.
Okay, if we attended this training, are we considered volunteers? And if so, do we still need the fishing license? So to be exempt from the fishing license, you have to be a Missouri Stream Team volunteer. And I'm double checking on the Master Naturalist. I'm hoping to have that answer when we send the follow-up email for everybody who's here as a Master Naturalist. So if you're not a part of those programs, you are required to have the fishing license. And if you're interested in joining Missouri Stream Team, we're having a new volunteer orientation next Monday. It's up on our website now. So just a little plug for that. Do you have a preferred size if they're getting multiple sizes of what looks to be the same crayfish species?
Usually the bigger crayfish are just a little easier to see those defining characteristics. So the bigger the crayfish, the better, but we're open to any size.
And what is the difference between a shrimp and a crayfish?
So they're essentially like cousins. They're pretty closely related. One of the biggest differences is the fact that crayfish have those really enlarged claws compared to shrimp do not, but they're both 10-legged crustaceans. And we do even have some freshwater shrimp in our state.
How do you capture burrowing crayfish?
Burrowing crayfish can take some unique methods to collect. They usually need to be collected by hand, and so you typically have to stick your hand in the burrow to hand excavate, but this can require proper training and knowing what you're looking for, as there are other inhabitants of burrows, and so we don't want people sticking their hands in burrows that might have a snake, so please use caution and yeah, you use caution before sticking your hand down a crayfish burrow, please.
You could also get like endoscopes and use them to put a
Yeah.
camera down in. We have a couple of them in our program. Okay. Let me see. I caught up on the ones that I had copied over to my other page. How do you tell how old a crayfish is?
Usually we tell how old a crayfish is by kind of looking at the range of sizes that are present in a population, and we break them into year classes and kind of just guess how many year classes are present based on the size distribution. There are some newer technologies that are being developed to be able to actually age crayfish. It's similar to aging a tree using the growth rings in a tree, or with fish, we age them using either their scales or their otoliths. They also have growth rings. Crayfish have one single hard part that's located in their stomach that's never shed in their life, compared to the rest of their hard parts. They periodically molt. And so some folks are developing the ability to actually use this hard part in the stomach to age them using growth rings.
Okay, I'm gonna have we're at 7:30 now, but I'm just gonna have two more questions to finish out with. One, are there any photo observations of molts would that be useful to the project?
It definitely can be, depending on the location. If you're in a location that there's only a couple of species, then a molt, we might still be able to identify the species based on a molt, but if there's a lot of species present in an area, it could definitely be trickier.
And then last question, has there been much sampling around boat ramps and riprap areas in larger lakes in the state?
That's a great question that I know our program hasn't specifically done that significantly in the past, but I know a lot of just the previous iNaturalist records seem to kind of be more in these areas that are more accessible to the public. So there's been some searching, but not any dedicated searching efforts.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up there. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and thank you Cheyenne for presenting. It was really great. We'll be
Absolutely.
sending out a follow-up email when we have the recording ready. And if you guys have any more questions on the email that we sent out that has the recording, both my contact and Cheyenne's is on there. So feel free to send us more questions if you have them. And yeah, thanks again for attending.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, Hannah, for setting this up.